So next, let's talk about first. Let's get this on a sheet. Okay, let's do that. So how will we do that? We To get it on the sheet, we need to create a sheet. So I'm going to click here, right click, and say New Sheet, and I'm going to load right a new title block. I'm just going to go to Title Blocks, and I'm going to say, give me, for the purpose of this exercise, this 30 by 42 sheet right here, right? And I'm going to say okay, right? And it's unnamed, and that's fine. And I'm going to change this to maybe a schedule sheet is an A5 sheet, okay? Because schedules are usually further back in the drawing set. Usually you have your civil drawings, and then you have your structural drawings, and then architectural. But in the architectural, the A101s, the 100 series are usually plans, and 200 series are usually elevations or sections, depending on the firm you work at. But schedules are usually always further toward the back. So now that I got this sheet up, in order to show the schedule, I'm just going to click on where it says room schedule here. I'm going to drag that out here. All right. And there's my room schedule. And I'm just going to click. And now my room schedule is on my sheet. But look at where this, it's kind of bunching things up. Well, what's nice is that when it doesn't fit, you can come in here. If I go to the room schedule first, you see how it looks normal over here in the room schedule. It doesn't look like those things are bunched up. But now when I go over here, I see that that one's a little small. And look what it's doing to my levels as well. So what you can tell is what you see here in the schedule is not necessarily what's going to look like when you put it on the sheet. So you're going to have to do some adjusting. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to click on this and we'll say, we'll make the department one a little bigger. That way we can read the whole department. And we're going to make the level field a little wider so that what? So that certain things show up. And they show up a certain way. And right now, as you look at it, all these things are what? They are justified in a particular area, a particular section of the schedule. So how can we fix that? Well, let's go to room schedule. And while we're here, we can go to another tab. It's called the Appearance tab. And when we click on Appearance, what we have is, how do we want these things to show up? How do we want how do we want them to sit within the field itself? How can we do that? So what could we do to show that? We could look at the formatting and we can look at appearance. And we'll go between the two for right now. So let's look at the level column for me, because the level one looks a little wide right now here. But as we said, you know, when we get in there, it's really not as wide as we would think. So going back to the schedule, I'm going to go to, I'll just click on formatting first. And under formatting, for the level area, the level field in here, I'm going to say the heading orientation, it's going to read horizontal, but I could make it read vertical. Watch this. I'm going to click it and oh, nothing happened. It's not vertical anymore. It's not vertical. But wait a minute. Look how I turned it vertical in there. Okay, so you see that's not necessarily something I do. I almost never do these, but in some instances, in some mechanical and electrical schedules, because the field is very small, what we'll do is we'll make these vertical at times, and then the quantity, which might just be a numerical quantity, fits a lot easier in our schedule. And we would probably get more into that if we were doing something on the HVAC, electrical, or plumbing side of things, for things like CFM or things like pipe size or something like that. We could put that in the schedule, and then we could turn these vertical and they would take up less space on a sheet, if that makes sense. Okay? So let's go back here and we'll go back to formatting and we'll say, hey, we don't want level to be vertical. We want it to be horizontal. But we can change the alignment. You see alignment right now is to the left, but what if I go to center, right? And now it's centered here and it's centered here as well, which means I can go in now and say, let me make that a little smaller. And see how that works out a little better, right? That looks a little better. So again, back to our schedule, let's look at some other things. Let's go back and let's look at appearance. So if we click on appearance, look how we can say, how about if I have grid lines, right? Right now they're thin lines. What do I mean by thin lines? Well, these lines are pretty thin, but what if I wanted to change the look of that? Well, again, go back to my schedule, and I can go to appearance this time, and I can say in here, instead of thin lines, let's make these wide lines. What's that going to look like when I go back here? Well, nothing right now, but if I type in TL on the keyboard, look how they got wider. Thin line, thick line, remember that? Or if you don't really want to do that, can you go to View and click on thin lines and thick lines? You see that? Now those are wide lines now, okay? How else could I change the appearance? Well, I could go in here and I could say, go back into appearance, and I'm going to say that I want to outline something, but instead of having wide lines for grid lines, what if I go back to thin lines where I was, and I say I want to outline on my schedule, and I want it to be wide lines, right? And I could say okay, and go back to my schedule, and now notice I've got a wide line. If I go to my thin lines, see how I have a thick line out here, a wide line, and a thin line in here. And now my whole schedule is encapsulated. You see how before, you really can't tell that on here. But again, under the appearance is where I do that. Now, what would happen if I uncheck this blank row before data? Let's look at this. What if I uncheck that and hit OK? And then went back here. So now I don't have that blank line anymore. Watch what happens. I'll go back again to my schedule, and I'll go to appearance, and I'll go ahead and click on this time, right? You see how it puts a blank row before that? Again, one more time. Pay attention to this area right in here. I'm going to click on appearance, and I'm going to say blank row before data. I'm going to uncheck that, and now it moves it. So it's really just a personal preference, but you can see how that blank row, that's not a bad feature to have in there, because it just gives you a little bit of a visual gap, right, before those things start. And you can play around with the other features in there as well. What do I mean by that? Well, you go back to room schedule, and you can click on appearance, and you can say, you know what, let's not show a title, right? Well, what do I mean by that? Well, if I click that, you see how that title goes away and it doesn't tell me what kind of schedule that is. Well, that would seem kind of silly, wouldn't it? But you might have a reason for not wanting to see that. I could also say, don't show the headers. Well, what does that mean? Well, now you showed the titles, but now we're missing the headers that were in there. That told me what, right? What were those headers? Well, obviously, going back in here, if I go to appearance and I say show headers, I can say okay, and now it shows me number, name, level, department, and area. Number, name, level, department, and area. Those are probably pretty important things to see. Now, what you're seeing now is all these things are kind of the same size, but what if we wanted to change that up a little? How would we do that? Well, going back to row and schedule, you would probably guess we go to appearance, and now let's say, look at that title text, right? Look how you can change that title text from the default into something that you would want to see in the actual model. Maybe I want to see things a little differently. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, if I hit cancel here, notice how if I go to annotate, under here I can't draw actual text, right? But what if I say text types, and I click on here, and I say, I want to go to a header text, right? And I want to duplicate that, and I want to say header schedule header text, right? Whoops, that's test, not text. Sorry about that. And I hit OK. And I say, I want it to be, we kind of like this Century Gothic, but just for grins so you can see the actual change, what if I did this? Nope, you may not have that one on your computer. I'm gonna leave it at Century Gothic right now. But I'm gonna say I want the text to be, let's say 1 inch, okay? All right, and I say okay, and I click that, and then I go back into appearance, and now title text, what if I say make that schedule header text, okay? Woohoo! That's pretty big. So big, so much so that what? It's not even really showing up in there. So you can see how it's in there, but it's way too big, right? So what do I need to do to fix that? Well, obviously I go back to appearance and I'd say schedule header text, and in the schedule header text, I have to go back out here and say, if I go to my annotate tab, where the only text option available is the properties, I have to go in here and say, let's say that the schedule header text, instead of being a full inch, maybe it's only a 1/4 inch, right? And now when I go here, you can see I've changed that and it's a 1/4 inch. I could also say I want this to read differently and go in here to room schedule. Well, how do I want it to read? Well, under appearance, under formatting, right? If I go to level, right? I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong. I'm in the wrong. I'm in the wrong thought now. Um, Under this title text, um, if I want this to change and I want it to be all capital letters, I'm going to have to adjust that someplace else. Let's just pause this for a moment so we can talk about it. So if I want to change this so that instead of it reading room schedule like this, it read all capital letters, I could just come in here and put caps lock on and just put ROOM SCHEDULE, right? And now that that's like that, now it's reading as room schedule over here. Instead of all lowercase, I just change it to uppercase. So it's basically changing things you want to see differently. I can also say, right, what if I go into this text now and I say, that schedule header text, I want it to be bold, right? Well, now it's bold, but it's run by the text type properties. You don't change that part of it within here. And that's kind of what I wanted you to see. So we'll go ahead and stop this video and we'll move on to our next one. And in our next one, we're going to talk about grid lines a little more. We'll look at some conditional formatting and look at some of the things that we can actually do to make things pop a little more on our schedule. Okay? I'll give you about 10 or so minutes to work on this portion. So let's come back at 2:40 and we'll pick up again.